Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, May 25th. I am Dr. Zach Long coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're a couple days away from Memorial Day, a day where in America we remember those active duty military service members who died in service for our country. In the CrossFit world, it's a day where we do a special workout to remember those people. The workout is called Murph. And that's after U.S. Navy SEAL Michael Murphy, who died in Afghanistan. Some of you may have seen the movie Lone Survivor. And in Lone Survivor, it kind of tells the story of Michael Murphy. He actually left the cover of the woods to go out into an exposed area to signal to get support in for his team. And in doing so, he ended up dying. So this workout, Murph, is incredibly important to a lot of CrossFitters. It's a really big deal in the CrossFit world. And I want to talk a little bit about the workout and then just some of the things that we see come along with that workout. So this workout, Murph, is pretty intense. It starts with the 1 mile run, and then athletes go into 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, and then finish with another 1 mile run. And a lot of times this workout is also done wearing a weight vest as well. Morning, Matthew. So it's a really intense workout. And I got to say, over the last couple of years, I have caught 5 cases of rhabdomyolysis, 4 of which were after the workout Murph. These are athletes that came to my clinic with certain symptoms, and I was fortunate enough to recognize them as rhabdo and get them to the appropriate medical provider. But we need to be aware of this condition as physical therapists that might potentially have these people walking into our clinic so that we don't miss a potentially dangerous medical condition. So we're going to talk about that condition a little bit today, and then we're going to also talk about what do we do if an athlete like this shows up in our clinic? How do we go about returning them to sport? Before we dive into what it is, I think it's important to recognize rhabdo in CrossFit is one of those things that a lot of people attack CrossFit for, which I do in many ways understand. And that, like so many injuries that we see in CrossFit or fitness in general, comes down to a training load error. We'll discuss that a little bit more later. But this has also been reported in the literature happening to firefighters, to active duty military service members, to long distance runners. Most often where we see it in the medical community is in people taking statins, where that statin leads to them developing rhabdomyolysis. So let's dive a little bit into it. Most of what I'm going to talk about today comes from this research article, Identification and Signs and Symptoms of Acute Exertional Rhabdomyolysis in Athletes, a Guide for Their Practitioner. If you're watching live on Facebook, I'm going to try to put a link up to that, to an article that has a link to that. You can search for it if you're not watching live on Facebook. All right, so what is rhabdo? Rhabdo is a medical condition that results from extreme skeletal muscle injury that basically results in the integrity of the muscle cell itself is broken down so that the muscle cell content is basically let to float out into the plasma. So acute exertional rhabdomyolysis occurs when exercise volume is really, really high. A lot of times that comes along with exercises that have a prolonged eccentric muscle contraction phase. So in the CrossFit world, a lot of times we're going to see this in workouts that revolve around a huge volume of pull-ups where there's this really long eccentric muscle contraction coming down from the barbell. And that basically results in myofibrils and sarcolemma being broken down to the point where there's this huge release of creatine kinase into the blood. And that can result in some really negative medical conditions. That can result in acute renal failure. It can result in cardiac arrest, compartment syndrome, and in serious conditions, rhabdomyolysis can lead to death. So it's something that if it walks into our clinic, we need to be able to recognize it really fast and then refer these people to the appropriate clinician. So there are 5 things that we're typically going to see in somebody that presents to us with rhabdomyolysis. And the first is they're going to have severe muscle soreness. Now I'm talking like they come in and they are miserably sore, and you ask them, hey, on a scale of 0 to 10, how sore are you? Everyone that I've seen in the clinic was like, I am at 8 out of 10 sore. This is by far the worst I've ever been. And this is usually they're going to report to you 24 to 48 hours after that exercise bout. You're going to look at whatever muscle group is very sore, and you're going to notice that there's a significant amount of swelling in that muscle group. And you're going to usually see this bilaterally. So every time I've caught it has been in the bicep muscles. So they show up, and their biceps are looking pretty swole, but not in a good way. They're going to have a significant loss of active range of motion. So when you ask them to do a bicep curl and elbow extension, you're going to see that they've lost range of motion. And every time I've seen it, they've lost it in both directions. They're going to be incredibly weak. And then the big hallmark sign of that is their urine is going to be discolored. It's going to be a lot darker than they've ever seen it. Now, that discolored urine is what most people typically look for, and is their giant red flag for diagnosing somebody or thinking that they might have rhabdo. But I want to say I have never had an athlete come to me with rhabdo and have discolored urine. So don't hang your hat on that discolored urine piece alone, because if you do that, you're gonna miss out on some more people. Now, if they have a couple of these symptoms, you're going to want to dive a little bit more into a discussion with them on what led to this. What type of exercise were they doing? Were they doing exercises that had a significant amount of eccentric loading in it, or just a lot of high-intensity loading in it? Type of exercise they were doing, what's their current conditioning like? And again, you want to check on the color of their urine. When I've seen it clinically, of the 5 cases I've caught, they were all around pull-ups. And each of these athletes had done greater than 50 pull-ups. 4 of the 5 had done 100 pull-ups as part of the Murph workout, or one of those 4 was a different workout that still had them doing over 100 pull-ups in one workout, which is just not something that a lot of CrossFit athletes are prepared for. So when in our advanced cohort class, Advanced Concepts in the Clinical Management of the Fitness Athlete online course that I teach with Mitch Babcock, one thing we really pay attention to in programming is the amount of volume that people put into their pull-ups on a week-to-week basis. And my typical rule of thumb is we're going to keeping pull-ups to below 50 in a week. And so for a lot of people that have been doing less than 50 in a week, they go and do a workout like Murph where they do 100. That's going to be more than their body is ready to recover from. So if athletes are coming to me and I know that they have Murph coming up, I'm usually having a discussion with them on, hey, how are you doing Murph this year? Are you doing it scale? Are you doing it RX? If they're doing it RX, all right. You might want to start working on increasing that weekly volume of pull-ups over the month or 2 prior to doing Murph, so your body's a little bit better conditioned for that. The other case of rhabdo that I've seen, this athlete was dealing with a knee injury that we were treating. So she goes to her CrossFit gym, and the workout was run half mile, 50 pull-ups, run half mile. I think there was some other stuff in there as well. But because she couldn't run, they subbed in rower. So she did like a 1,000-meter row, 50 pull-ups, 1,000-meter row. Rowing is a lot more stressful on the biceps than running is. So that volume of bicep work led to her getting some rhabdo. So really pay attention to athletes' pull-up volume there. Now, I have heard some stories of athletes suspecting that they had rhabdo and going to see their primary care physician. And, with no fault to their primary care physician, they're not super familiar with this acute exertional rhabdo. They're only looking for this in people on statins a lot of times. And so I've heard some stories of people that went 2 or 3 days before their doctor actually thought to go through testing for rhabdo and then gone through multiple other tests. So when somebody shows up to me like this, I typically am going to write a note and I'm going to tell them, look, I want you to call up your primary care, see if they can get you in right away. If they can't get you in right away, you're going to urgent care or the emergency room. And I'm going to write a note with, hey, I am suspecting this acute exertional rhabdo. That way it might, get that doctor's moving a little faster towards testing their CK levels than maybe they would otherwise do. Just because I don't want this person to go through some unnecessary treatment if I'm highly suspectant of rhabdo. When their doctor has cleared them to start exercising again, I'm typically going to talk this athlete through, here's your return to CrossFit progression. And again, in the article that I'm going to link on our Facebook page, you can read this journal article that outlines it. I'm going to give you specifically how I've talked athletes through this from a CrossFit perspective. Initially, in those first 1 to 3 weeks, we want to wait until their CPK levels are back down to normal levels before we start really doing anything. And then all it's going to be is some gentle passive range of motion as well as gentle active range of motion. And we're really emphasizing to the athlete that we're not causing any discomfort here. We're not causing any increases in muscle soreness. Oh, we got to switch cameras. So we're not increasing any muscle soreness. Sorry, guys, a little technical issue there. And then once they've gotten to where they have full range of motion and they're not having any muscle soreness, then we can progress to phase 2. We're going to start some really light aerobic conditioning with the involved muscles. We're not going anaerobic right now. We're not doing any heavy resistance training. We're going to start with about 5 minutes, building up to 15 minutes. And typically, if it's somebody coming to me with rhabdo and their biceps were the main involved muscle group, we're going to get them on the rower with the damper set all the way down. Start them at 5 minutes at a really light pace and slowly build that up to about 15 minutes. When they can hit 15 minutes there, then we can start some light isolation exercises. And then, depending on how they're progressing here, as long as they're not getting increased, significantly increased soreness or muscle discomfort, we can progress them from these light isolation exercises to heavier isolation exercises and heavier compound exercises. Just like everything in the medical world, that's going to be really dependent on how that individual shows up in your clinic. But that's going to be, in general, a good progression for you to get people moving after acute exertional rhabdo. So I hope none of you actually see that in the clinic. But if you do, I'm going to pop this little algorithm up on the screen for those of you that are watching on Facebook. Basically, an athlete's going to do an exercise bout, and then 24 to 48 hours after this exercise bout, they're going to present to you with significant bilateral muscle soreness. If that is significant muscle soreness, then we need to talk to them a little bit more about what's going on there. Is it bilateral? Are they having urine color changes? Are they having significant swelling? If all of those are present or some of those are present, then you need to get them to a different medical provider as soon as possible for further testing there. Hope you all enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Before we wrap up, let's talk about a couple upcoming courses that we have going on through ICE. On June 2nd, Jeff is heading to Olney, Maryland to do cervical spine management course. And on that same day, Mitch is heading to Danbury, Connecticut to talk Fitness Athlete Live. Later in the month, June 30th and July 1st, I'll be heading to Anaheim, California to do the Fitness Athlete Live course. And then Mitch and I also have on June 18th our next cohort of the Advanced Concepts in the Clinical Management of the Fitness Athlete course. So we're really excited to jump into another round of that course. Hope everybody has a wonderful Memorial Day. Stay safe.